So in context of your reading and everything that we're going to do throughout our course together, what I want to cover here is, what is educational psychology? What is this? Where did it come from? What's the meaning behind it? And what we come to find out is that this is actually a very long history of what was never called educational psychology, but actually came to be known as educational psychology over time. So you can see that way back into 400 BC, Aristotle and Plato were conceptualizing what this process of learning actually meant, and it funneled down. And it wasn't until about 1890 that William James started to give talks to teachers about psychology and how that played a role in what they were doing as teachers. So think about a day when teachers didn't think about their students as people, as thinking people in this process of education, and what that must have looked like for the education system. Filter that down a little bit further. G. Stanley Hall, who was a student of William James, actually began the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, which is where we get our APA writing style. So this started to filter down. We were having talks about psychology in the context of teaching, and that led to one of my favorites, my personal favorites, John Dewey, who was all about progressive education. So the idea of promoting thinking and growth and learning, which we are going to study throughout this course. But being able to actually think about being progressive in the way that we're actually doing things, not in just the way that we think about things. It's applying the action to the thought. So these were students of William James, as you can see, G. Stanley Hall and John Dewey. And then there was another student, E.L. Thorndike, who was credited for writing the first educational psychology text. So that was in 1903. As you can see, our study of educational psychology, I know that seems like a really long time ago, but in the context of the education system and education itself, this is a fairly new thought. The idea of thinking about students as individual thinkers who have come to the classroom with their own personalities, with their own thoughts, with their own background and upbringing. On into the 40s and 50s, 1940s and 50s, that's when we began to see individual differences being accounted for in the classroom. So assessment, taking into account difference in assessment and learning behaviors of students. And 1903 cognitive, and I have that out of context, I apologize. That's actually supposed to say 1980. 1980, we started to see cognitive development and learning, or the study of learning and memory. So that memory system process where we're building and bridging the idea of what happens when we remember something? Where does it go? How does that information become stored in the brain? So there is so much to this history, but this is a very brief and very general overview to let you know that this has more recently become a scientific study within the education system. So again, we revisit this question, is this class for me? And when we consider this really fun definition of, fun is relative, but what happens when someone teaches something to someone else in some setting? That's what we do in educational psychology. We describe the processes that happen. What's the best way? What's the best route? And that's where we're headed with educational psychology. So if you're a student, if you plan to teach somebody anything in the future, this course is absolutely for you. And so as you progress through this, you're going to begin filtering your own interest areas in our individual time during coursework, where we're actually working together as a class. You're going to be bringing in your interest areas, whatever that is. If you're in education, you're going to pick your discipline that you're really kind of leaning towards in your studies. Maybe it's middle level math, maybe it's secondary science, maybe it's early childhood. You're going to begin to look through these lenses that we're going to discuss you're going to look through these lenses at concepts and those disciplines in your own way. So again, educational psychologists are really focused upon doing the research on learning and teaching, and at the same time, they're working to improve the educational practices. That's what we're going to do in this course together. So I hope you're looking forward to this. I sure am, if you can't tell. So you might be thinking, why do we need to study educational psychology? And as you can see from this slide, we have a growing amount of diversity within the classroom, within our nation, which is a beautiful thing. In 2003, 12% of the people living in the United States were born in another country. In addition, 18% spoke another language other than English at home. So we can see that classroom makeups, and this isn't just for the diversity of ethnicity, we're talking about socioeconomic status, which takes us into that next element of poverty. 1 in 5 children live in poverty in the United States. 1 in 5. 1 in 12 live in extreme poverty. So you might be saying, well, what does that actually mean for us in the education system? Is it potentially your fault that students are living in poverty, and is that your responsibility? In some respects, yes, because we have to be able to support those students who may need extra and additional supports and or building of the basic needs within your classroom or wherever you may work. And please forgive me if I utilize classroom often, but I want you to be thinking, if you hear that word and you're a respiratory therapist or you're a surgical technician, please think about this in the context of your specific workplace. To give you an idea of what poverty actually means, in 2011, so this is a little dated, but I just want you to consider this just for a moment. Extreme poverty, so we're talking the 1 in 12 students who would be sitting in your classroom. Extreme poverty was defined as making less than $22,000 for a family of 4. So just take that in. We're not even taking into account taxes that have been taken out. We're not taking into account health insurance that has been paid. We're not taking into account groceries and living costs. I encourage you to kind of unwind that, unpack that just for a bit, to think about $22,000 approximately for a family of 4. This is a huge problem. 1 in 12 are living in these conditions. 1 in 5 are living in poverty. So, what does that mean for us as teachers? What does that mean for us as a society? Is we need to advocate. We need to be ready to provide for things that we don't necessarily think of when we go into the education field initially, which would be those processes of you become a potential nurse from time to time, and you become a potential counselor from time to time, and you become a family support specialist from time to time. It's not just about teaching, it's about being able to look beyond the bounds of just putting information into the heads of children. And this is what it takes to be a teacher. So we know that diversity and poverty are some of the things of why educational psychology is really important. And those may appear to be more humanistic in nature, but we also see that there are other aspects that we have to consider as we're traveling along this road and this path of education, and that's technology. So in 2013, take this in just for a moment, 2013, 29% of students in grades 3 to 5, 56% of students in 9 through 12 had access to cell phones. 56% of students in 9th through 12th had access to cell phones. What's interesting about that? I'm pausing for you to think. What's interesting about that is that I bet that number is a little higher because this study was conducted in 2013. So what we know is that in this short amount of time, technology has just surpassed our wildest expectations for what is in the pockets of our students. They have any piece of information that they would ever need to know in their pocket. So does that does that change the way that we're teaching? Well, it should, right? It should. So that's something we have to keep in mind. Educational psychology is not just for working with societal issues. Educational psychology is using the tools and society in which we live, and the access and the materials and the new knowledge to further support practices of learning and teaching. So as teachers, we are called to support and be prepared to understand the needs of our students from various backgrounds and a constantly evolving society. If you're going to be working in a hospital, we need to know this information so that we can better work to serve our patients. This goes beyond the bounds of just education, but this is very much rooted in education. So this is part of that process. So as a general course description, so this is where we're headed with all of this. This course really deals with the psychological aspects of the educational process. And when we say educational process, this really just means teaching and learning. This deals with theories and research from both psychology and education, in which we examine throughout those areas. So there's multiple areas within psychology and education that we further break down to make up what we call educational psychology. So as you can see, we have education, instructional design and technology, learning science, cognitive science, psychology, cognitive neuroscience. But then from there, we also have those elements that we're going to be looking at: cognitive, language, and social development, individual differences, culture, cognitive processes, and so on. So educational psychology is a mixture of all of these disciplines brought together to identify and interpret the data, the research, to really put into practice what are the best possible ways we can truly teach people how to learn and what is the best way that we can do that. It goes without saying, when we begin a course, that the most important thing that you can do for yourself is to examine your course learning objectives. Your learning objectives are going to guide the entire course that you're taking. So I encourage you, I know this is something that's often brushed over in the context of looking at a syllabus, because we run right to those assignments and we look through those elements of, what has to be due when, and we get into this mindset of checkoff system. But I want you to really root yourself in this idea of learning objectives. Why are we here? I've broken down each one of these elements, so 1 through 5. We have 5 learning objectives, and you can read those on your own. But what I've done is I've actually broken them down to create units around them. So our first unit is going to be focusing upon development. Our second unit is going to be focusing upon learning and motivation. Third, embracing student diversity. Fourth, pedagogy, meaning the process of teaching and the ways in which we do this. And positive learning environments. Why are these important? And the 5th unit is all about assessment. So you're going to see these reflected in your week-to-week plan that is laid out in Canvas for you, and also through your syllabus. You're going to see these laid out. And by the end of this course, it's my hope that you can walk away feeling confident in your own ability to have discussions around these core topics. And finally, to bring this slide deck to a close, this is my own personal intention for you within this course. I want you walking away from this course being able to hold an academic conversation based in scientific thought, not only opinions, not only what you've grown up with or what you've heard or what you've experienced as an anecdotal piece of evidence, but real scientific thought about the unit topics. I want you to develop an excitement, or at the very, 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 very least, an interest in the topics of educational psychology. So those units that have been laid out for you, I'd love for you to be able to take one of those and say, wow, this is really interesting, and I'm feeling a little bit of excitement around this so that I can take this into my own practice. And then finally, based upon what we're doing together, it's my hope for you that you're going to know, based upon what we do in class and the activities that you complete outside of class, that you're going to know where to go and how to find that additional information from which to grow and develop in your own knowledge of the course material. I can't tell you how much information there is out there. And the only thing that I can tell you from my own personal process of going to school over the course of, K to 12, and then through a bachelor's degree, and then training and certificate programs, and then a master's degree, and then doctoral studies, which totaled another K through 12 experience. The only thing that I can tell you after doing that is that I only recognize how much more there is for me to know. The more we know and the more we learn, the more we recognize how much we really don't know. So it's the process of understanding that maybe we don't know something in the future, but we can use our resources, use what we've done in our coursework to be able to know how to find it. And that's where you become a true scholar and an academic, is your ability to actually utilize that information to move forward and to begin the process of learning and growing in that way. So I'm excited for you, and I'm excited to take this journey with you, and I really look forward to seeing you in class on our first day together.